that should take months to write. It takes a lot of time for people to be able to write this segment. So I encourage you to write this as soon as you can. Um, with that said, I have multiple students in this class with various interests, um, and what you'll find here is that the the way you would write a personal statement for a graduate school is very different from the way that you would write a personal statement from medical school. And I'm going to try to tackle both to the best of my ability. And of course, this is coming out this way. Guys, when y'all see these PowerPoints on y'all's end, do y'all see the wording like out of the slide and stuff? Or y'all see it fine? Sometimes, yes. Okay. Well, then it might be helpful if you, on a separate screen, have the PowerPoint open. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. On a separate screen, go open up the PowerPoint so that you can see it, and you can at least go with my slides, um, the joys of online teaching. So go ahead and do that really quick. I'm doing the same thing. All right. Yeah, I realize they look zoomed in and they're not supposed to be, and I don't know why they are. But all right, so we're on this slide here. So what I was saying was that basically uh, there's different ways to write a personal statement based off what it is that you're applying to. So in other words, if you're going to go to graduate school, you would write a personal statement very differently from a person who's going to a pre-health profession, whether it be medical school, pharmacy school, dental school, PA school, whatever it may be. So I'm going to do my best to try to show you both ways and hopefully make it very clear which way you would be following. But there's two different types of personal statements. One of them is a very general, comprehensive personal statement, which makes it's very free for you to write what you want about, to give an idea of who you are, right? So it's very open-ended. Um, and then there's very specific personal statements where they're asking very specific questions. Medical school, pharmacy school, dental school, PA school, the pre-health professions, they used to be very big on the general personal statement, where graduate school was always very specific questions that they want you to answer. Now, medical school has still the personal statement, but they also have multiple other essays that they will ask you to write that are much more specific questions, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that I see students make, because I review quite a few personal statements as a favor to students, is that they don't answer the question, right? And if you don't answer the question that you're being asked, then right off the bat, you're not going to be considered to go to the next round, right? Because when they're looking at a personal statement, they're looking for a few things from you. Um, they're looking to see, can you um, can you um, write, right? Can you communicate effectively? So they're looking at your writing skills. But the other they're looking at is, can they get an idea of who you are as a person, right? So who you are as a person. So this might be a more specific question, but which type would you follow if you're planning on an MD PhD? Honestly, both. The MD PhD programs will ask you to write multiple statements, right? One to focus on your research end and one to focus on your medical performance. But with that said, the MD PhD ones are a lot closer to the graduate personal statements than they are to medical school programs. All right. So, um, here we go. This does not look good. So you remember, you follow to the next slide on your screen because this does not look good. All right, so questions to ask yourself before you write. And my PowerPoints are very wordy, which is probably why this is having problems. And the reason they're wordy is this is not meant to be a presentation more than notes for you guys, right? These are your lecture notes so that you can go back and review them when you start writing them. So that's why I have them here, since you guys don't have a textbook or something or anything like this. So questions to ask yourself before you write. First thing that you need to ask yourself is, what makes you different from other people that are applying for the same position? Like, what's going to make you unique? What's going to make you stand apart from other people? And the first part about writing a personal statement is asking yourself these questions. And to be honest, it's a lot of self-reflection. It's kind of just like sitting in a room and just thinking about these things and thinking about yourself and how to sell yourself and how do you communicate why you want um, this career that you're pursuing, right? You really need to spend time thinking about it. Um, what details of your life brought you to that decision? Where there's family or history there, a certain event in your life that may have influenced your decision to either pursue graduate school or medical school, dental school, PA school. What is it? Oh, what was something that helped you solidify that decision, right? You need to think about these things. When did you become interested in the field, right? When did it all begin? And and what have you done to kind of like fuel that interest, right? Did you, because you had the interest, did you start volunteering in places? Did you get certification in something? Did you get a career in a certain field to try to develop that interest, right? So these are things you need to consider. Um, have you learned about it through, did you go beyond those experiences? Did you try to learn more, reading different things or taking certain classes or seminars, these type of things? So, what did you use to fuel that interest so that you can reach your goal? Um, if you worked a lot during your college years, did you learn any skills that might be useful, right? Whether it be leadership skills or managerial skills, right? These are things that people don't really think of. Some people call them soft skills, and I don't understand why they call them soft skills because, just about in every position, you're going to need to have leadership and managerial skills. Me as a professor, I need to have these. Of course, anybody as a health professional is going to need to have these, right? And you don't only have to get them by being in that field, you can get them through other experience. And ultimately, you also need to think about is, what do you want to do with your life, right? And this is probably the hardest question that people have trouble answering is, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be a physician? And if you want to be a physician, why? And that's probably the hardest question, right? If you want to be a physician, why do you want to be a physician? Why is this the um, there's so many cliche answers, right? Is it because I want to save lives? Ooh, kiss of death answer right there, right? No. Uh, Chances are you're eventually going to lose some lives, right? That's very cliche. I want to help people. Okay, well then why not be a nurse or a respiratory therapist? Because they help people. Why do you want to be a physician, right? Because, and I always go back to that. People say, well, I want to save lives. I say, well, nurses save lives too. Why not be a nurse, right? Um, what is it about being a physician that is going to, or a dentist or a pharmacist or PA, right? That's a very common question for those of you that want to be PAs. It's like, well, why not? Why do you not want to be a physician, right? You need to be ready for these type of questions. For scientists, right? Why do you want to be a scientist? Very cliche. I want to discover new things. Uh, Come on, you got to put some substance in here, right? Some thoughts and some cohesive answers here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next slide here, and this is a personal statement. I'm going to hit the grad school first, right, and talk about these are things that you would require for grad school, and then some of the things might be similar for med school, but maybe not exactly. And then we'll contrast it with the pre-health profession type of personal statement so that everybody knows, what category they're in. But before I move on to those, are there any questions before I move on to that? No? All right. So let's go ahead and go to this next one here. I put grad school in capital letters so that people know that this is really particular for grad school, because in grad school, that means that you're going to decide to, for a career in research, either a master's or a PhD, and you're going to be committing to research for several years. So with that said, you want to include, well, what are your goals of your career? Because as a scientist, as a PhD level scientist, we have a lot of opportunities. We can go into academia, where you can be a research faculty, and this is a lot of your faculty that you've probably taken classes with, where they have a research lab, but they only teach one class a semester, right? Because the bulk of their time is dedicated to research. Or you can be teaching faculty, much like myself, where bulk of my time is dedicated to teaching. Or you can go into pharmaceuticals, right? You can go into industry and work for industry there. You can also even go into government jobs like the Center for Disease Control, right? So what do you want to do with that degree once you've completed it? Your research training up to this point. For those of you that are thinking of going to graduate school, you want to make sure that you get research experience because it's very uncommon for people to provide positions in graduate school for people who have not done research. It's very uncommon. They want people with undergraduate research. The reason being is they don't want you to go through grad school realizing, oh no, I don't like research, I'm going to leave. No, they know that if you've had undergraduate experience doing research, that okay, this is something that they plan to stick through. So you want to make sure you talk about the training that you've already had as an undergrad. How has that training directed you towards your career? And how did you select your mentor? In other words, how did you select the PI, the lab that you join? And when you are applying to a school, let's say you're going to apply to a graduate program at Purdue, well, then you should mention who do you want to be your mentor at that chemistry department at Purdue University, right? And why do you want to work in that person's lab, right? So that to show that you've researched that institution. What can that PI or the person that you're going to join their lab, that sponsor, how can they help you reach your ultimate goals for your career? And then how can the environment at that institution, if it's Purdue, how is it that Purdue it specifically can help you enhance your training and reach your ultimate goals, right? And more specifically, that department, right? How can that department help facilitate your personal needs? So, so these are things that you need to think about for graduate school. Because you literally are going to be joining a person's lab and learning from them for about 4 to 5 years. And it's basically a marriage. And we make this joke all the time in graduate school that you're entering a marriage because you're going to learn and be with this person for 4 to 5 years for them to train you as an apprentice. And it definitely feels like a marriage um, halfway through. So how to begin, right? So you want to begin with a very solid description of your long-term goals, right? It should be very direct, detailed, but not yet general, enough so that it doesn't become disingenuous, in other words, or too cliche either, right? Um, what grad school, when it comes to a personal statement, follows very closely to what I teach you in this class because it's being reviewed by scientists, right? Concise, to the point. Tell me what you bring to the table. Tell me what makes you qualified and why I should pick you, right? Don't waste my time. Get to the point, right? So here's an example. It says, my long-term research interests involve investigating molecular pathways that contribute to the development of human disease with the goal of establishing an independent research laboratory at an academic institution. Um, so with that said, again, it's a little bit broad. It basically tells me you want to learn how human disease works, but not very specific about what disease. And you say you want to develop your own academic lab and an academic institution. So that's fair, right? But if you follow this statement with a description of how you became interested in research, it might seem a little bit explicit, but not disingenuous, right? In other words, not so naive or not so green. So here's another example. Uh, Here's an example of this. Ever since I was a child, I saw the wonders of the nature around me. I knew that I wanted to become a scientist. Blah, right? This is cliche, right? I mean, how many of you have ever seen this? It's like, Ever since I was a kid, I would ask myself, why is the sky blue? Right? How many times have I heard that, right? How many times have you guys heard that, right? Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to know, why was the sky blue? Why do birds fly? This is very cliche, right? Show that you've actually dived into the research and you're much more specific. Is there a story from your temp marriage? There's a lot of stories in my temp marriage that we're not going to go into. But okay, so then here's an improved statement, right? Something that, so both of these have flaws. Definitely the second one has a lot more flaws than the first one, right? It's just too cliche. Look at the bottom one. While in graduate school, a friend was diagnosed with and succumbed to leukemia. Upon reading about this disease, I found that many forms of leukemia have defining genetic characteristic of a chromosomal translocation which produce oncogenic fusion proteins. From that point on, I became interested in cancer biology research, in particular cancers that derive from chromosomal translocations. All right, so let's take a look at that. And does anybody want to unmute and tell me if you were a scientist? Actually, raise your hand if you want to go to graduate school as a scientist. Medulla. Okay, Medulla, do me a favor, unmute. And reading this sentence that I just read, if you read this as a scientist, what would you think?
Okay, sorry, where are we again? My computer is slow.
Oh, that's fine. We're on that last paragraph that says improved. I'll read it to you again. It says, while in graduate school, a friend was diagnosed with and succumbed to leukemia. Upon reading about this disease, I found that many forms of leukemia have a defining genetic characteristic of chromosomal translocation, which produce oncogenic fusion proteins. From that point on, I became interested in cancer biology research, in particular cancer that derive from chromosomal translocations.
Well,
So what do you think?
that's like all cancer. Isn't
Yeah,
that all
yeah,
cancer?
and they are specific with respect to chromosomal translocations, right? Um, but would you say that, oh, yeah, this person talks like a scientist. This person, I could see this person, being a freshman graduate student. Would you say that that's fair?
I mean, yeah, but also, I don't know. I think it's a little too vague. It's not in depth about what specifically about cancer research do they want to go into.
Gotcha. So there's a fine line, right? There's a fine line because you don't want to go, because remember it says you don't want to go too general. Like you don't want to say because I want to find a cure for cancer. Realize that that'll never happen, right? Because one, you'll never have one cure to cure all different types of cancers. You have to tackle them individually. Um, and that's very naive, right? But compared to, an interest in a particular type of cancer, such as leukemia, it's a little bit more specific, right? So yeah, it's a balancing act here. Raise your hand if you want to go to medical school. See a lot of medical schools here. Yeah, okay. Actually, I'm gonna start, let's go with Israel. Israel, if you can unmute. If you are reading this as a personal statement, to somebody who wanted to go to medical school, what would you think?
That they're definitely more like into the science of things rather than the patient.
Absolutely,
Um,
right? Very
yeah.
good point, right? Very good point. At this point, he says, while in graduate school, a friend was diagnosed with and succumbed to leukemia. And then I was so interested in their disease. Like, why, how does this happen? How's your disease? Oh, wait, what happened to your friend? Your friend has leukemia, right? So compared to medical school for health professions, they'd be a little bit more focused on the person, the compassion, the personal relationships, right? Not to say that they're not interested in the science, but this is something that would be written from a scientist, right? Where we're interested in the science, and somebody for they go to medical school, this would be really written for somebody in medical school. And do y'all remember that story? Remember that I gave you an introduction of that to review from the student from a previous semester. I told you that this student applied for the MD PhD program, that there wasn't very many students that I think that could actually do an MD PhD, but he could. And that when he initially was going to go to medical school, but when we did his mock interview, that it was all about science, science, science. this was him, right? This was very similar to things that he would say, like, yeah, so I had a friend who had non-Hodgkin's disease, and then I started to really research into it, and it was so cool how it worked. And I was like, wait a minute, it was cool that your friend. No, it wasn't cool that I had it. It was just cool how the disease works, and that I was like, okay, you're totally a scientist, right? So you gotta think about this, right, and how you're gonna deliver that. All right. So graduate school here. So your academic history. You also want to mention, where did you perform your previous training, right? Your undergraduate training. How did that contribute to your decision to pursue graduate school? Was there a particular class, right, or a particular professor who helped you develop this, right? Especially if the professor that you are indicating is somebody who's very well known in the field, right? This might be a very nice plug to let them know that you've had working with them, right, in this particular types of research topic. It's also important that a statement that describes the factors driving your decision. So, for example, as part of a graduate program at Purdue, I underwent a series of laboratory rotations during my first year of graduate school. Through these rotations, Dr. Doyle impressed me with his hands-on nurturing mentoring approach. Further, his research sparked my interest as it relates to my long-term goals. Okay. So if we look at this concisely and we summarize overall training, we can say, taken together, the skills learned from my experience at this institute and completion of my training plan with Dr. So-and-so in the department of so-and-so, along with ample mentoring opportunities available here, will equip me with the diverse qualities needed to pursue a career as an independent researcher in an academic environment, right? Very concise, and tells us an overall idea of the training that a person has received and where they want to go, right? So these are things that you need to consider for graduate school. Last slide for graduate school here is want to make sure that you bring up any past issues or personal circumstances that may have held you back from performing as much as you could have, right? Because here's the thing, there's no point in hiding them. There's no point in hiding them because they're going to see them. They're going to see, if you had an F on a certain class in a certain semester, they're going to see that on your transcript, right? So you need to be ready to explain these type of situations. Was it a personal family situation that required you to somehow either stop your research training, or maybe didn't allow you to perform as well as you did in class? Or maybe it was a health issue, right? A health issue that maybe you were hospitalized for a certain amount of time. Or as many as it might be possible, that it was an immaturity issue. The fact that you went through your freshman year very immature, you failed in all your classes or got C's in all your classes, and that means that sophomore, junior, and senior year was all dedicated to bringing those back up, right? Was that the case, right? Now, when you start to describe these things, you want to be a little bit delicate on how you deliver that, right? So here's an example. During my undergraduate career, I was not entirely sure of my dedication to academics. Because of this indecision, I did not perform as well as I could be expected in my classes. However, during my junior year, when I took a course in blank, I discovered my passion for blank, and as a result, fully applied myself to the newfound love. Now I'm dedicated to realizing my goals of becoming an independent scientist, as illustrated by my significantly improved grades in my final year of undergraduate and graduate school, right? So yeah, if you find out, now here's the thing, if your grades only went up senior year, then you might need to consider maybe doing like a post-bac to try to bring your grades up a little bit more, right? But if you say you completely bombed freshman year, but you saw your grades go up sophomore, junior, senior year, then that's okay to stay something like this. And then say you also got involved in research, right? So you say, and I also got involved in research. In other words, you start selling yourself to basically say, yes, I grew up, I matured, and I grew, right? There's nothing wrong with talking about personal growth throughout these processes. All right. So like I said, this is for graduate school. In graduate school, we're very dry. There's less emotion in our personal statements compared to the pre-health professions. Because when I wrote my personal statement for graduate school, it was basically, here's my research, this is the skills I have, this is why I'm a competitive candidate, this is what you wouldn't have to teach me. I can jump in the lab right off the bat and know how to do this, this, and that, right? But it was very little about, you know, my any interactions with diseases and stuff like that. Even though my research interests were medicinal chemistry, I didn't really focus so much on the disease and how it impacts people, more so than on the science itself, right? So this is very graduate school oriented. Now, let's talk about the others here. Those are the past personal circumstances. All right, so here, questions to ask yourself before you write. All right, so same here goes for medical school, the health professionals here. Are there any gaps or discrepancies in your academic record that you need to explain? And the medical schools have gotten very good at providing a separate essay where they allow you to answer this question, right? Because it might be that there was something that happened where you had a semester. You know, I had one former student who he unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer during the semester he was taking me, right? And he was going through chemotherapy and did not do very well. This would have given him the opportunity to explain why he had to drop all his classes or why he didn't perform as well in those classes, right? So those type of things. The other thing that they're going to want to know is, have you overcome any obstacles or hardships? This is very big to show that you are resilient, but also adaptive, right? And this is something that I try to preach a lot to my students, is that you have to be able to adapt, right? We have to be able to push through barriers and then be able to explain and determine how do we push through these barriers, right? What personal characteristics do you have that that make you suitable for the field or the profession, right? Now, a lot when it comes to our health professions is going to be, you know, compassion, integrity, persistence. These are characteristics that they want to see that you have. But here's the thing: you would never ever want to write a statement where you say, well, I'm a very compassionate, persistent person with a lot of integrity. You should know. If you write a statement like this, you never tell, you show, right? You show through examples and let the reader infer that you are compassionate, right? For example, I remember a personal statement from a student who they were working at the Corazon Clinic, and what they were working on a person with their feet. They had no shoes and they had a whole bunch of blisters and cuts, and they were doing wound care, you know, washing and so forth. And they weren't so focused on the disease. They were telling me more about the person. You know, the patient apparently was an African American male who had lost their home after his wife had passed away, and you know, they were very 50-50 as far as their income. Like, he told me their story. That tells me that this person, without them telling me that they are attentive, right? Based off their story, I could infer that the applicant is attentive, right? And compassionate and can empathize and sympathize, right? That they're interested. So don't tell me what you are. Tell me a story that shows these characteristics so that I can infer them for myself. What skills do you possess? Whether, we mentioned these before, leadership skills, communication skills are huge. They're going to be looking for communication skills, analytical skills, and so forth. How might you be a stronger candidate for graduate school or medical school in the profession, in the field, right? So in other words, what's going to make you a stronger candidate for medical school compared to somebody else, or pharmacy school compared to somebody else, right? What sets you apart? And then what are the most compelling reasons you give to the admissions committee to be interested in you? Because remember, you are competing and it is a tough competition. So why should they be interested in you compared to other applicants? All right. So here's another big thing, and this is, I find this very often in when in personal statements that I read is that students will not answer the question that is asked. And they just start talking about all these different things, but they never answer the question. So if they're asking you a specific question, if I read your thing, I'm going to ask, I'm always going to ask you. In fact, when you submit your final draft, when you submit your rough draft for your personal statement, I want the prompt. I want you to go find the one that you're going to do. If you're going to go to medical school, go find that personal statement that they say, the instructions. I want the instructions because I'm going to grade you based off, did you answer their questions? Okay, so you want to make sure you do that. Don't be tempted, and this is the same thing as the resume. You should not be using the same personal statement for every single thing you submit, right? Especially for grad school. That would be the kiss of death for grad school, because grad school needs to be very specific to the institution you're applying to, and particularly with the researchers that you want to work with. Medical school, well, they have these common apps now. So in that case, it's kind of, in certain cases, it's okay. But for example, if you wanted to apply to go to a DO school, they have other specific questions, right? So in other words, maybe the difference between the philosophy, what you believe the philosophy to be between a doctor of osteopathic medicine versus, a medical doctorate. So don't think that you should be using these same things for every single thing. If you're applying to schools individually, you need to gear them towards the school. All right, another thing here, and this is probably key, tell a story. Make sure that you tell a story, that you put a mental picture in somebody's head. Why? Because if your sounds like a regurgitated resume, right? Where it's just, oh, I did this, I did this, I did this, and I have this experience, and I have this experience, and I did this from here to here. No. Think about this. If I'm the reviewer, I have to read anywhere between 20 to 40 of these. And if you're the first one I read, am I going to remember yours when I'm reading number 40, right? So here's the thing. People may not remember your name, but they may remember your story. And I find this a lot, right? I mean, I can tell you personal statement after personal statement after personal statement that I've read, but only those that I remember. Why? Because they put an image in my head, right? They put an image in my head, and I have that image of that student working on that person's feet, right? With all these cuts and doing wound healing and having a conversation with them. That was an image that they put in my head, right? Another image I have in my head is of a student who said that he volunteered for Global Brigades and went to Panama. And what he really wanted to do is he really wanted to shadow the physicians, but he didn't get an opportunity to shadow the physicians because he wanted to go to medical school. Instead, he was shadowing. He was put in charge to kind of like, I don't want to say babysit, but babysit the children while the parents were receiving care, right? So he's there with the children, and then he says, well, they were all bored and frustrated and waiting for their turn to see for some dental care. So he said he got a soccer ball and he held the soccer ball up, and he said the children were like meerkats. Like they were up and attentive, just looking at the soccer ball, waiting for him to drop it. And then he dropped it, and then they all started playing, right? So I remember this because he put a mental picture in my head, right? And that's what you need to do. You need to put an image, a story that relates back to the overall theme of basically trying to explain who you are as a person. But this is going to be a lot more impactful because they may not remember your, but they're going to be like, oh, you're the person with the soccer ball, right? You're the one that went to Panama, right? See, they'll remember your story. And that's key thing here. Your story should be from the get-go. From the very first paragraph, you should be putting a mental image in their head. All right. Be specific. Actually, I should stop for questions. Are there any questions before I move on? No questions. All right. Be specific. Don't say that you want to be an excellent doctor unless you can back it up with, or you would make an excellent doctor unless you can back it up with specific reasons, right? So don't be saying like, oh, I would be an amazing physician because I would like to, because I want to do this and I have such a passion for it, and I want to, I have a drive and I'm going to reach this goal. This is all very cliche. People want to see what can you bring to the table, right? What have you done to prepare for this? So if you're going to be, if you want to, yeah, I would be an excellent doctor because I have had 5 years of medical experience working in various locations from the ICU to the ER. I've learned this, this, and that. I put myself in the arena. I've had these type of things, right? Don't say show, right? Don't say show. And this is this goes across the board for whether it be for medical school, graduate school, pharmacy school, dental school, all of them, right? You want to be specific. Um, but it should ultimately emerge as a logical conclusion to your story. In other words, that your last paragraph of the personal statement needs to relate back to the first paragraph because you need to find a theme. You need to find a moral to your story, right? And what you ultimately want to do. What is the message that if you had to, and I wonder if you just take 3 minutes, and you would need more than 3 minutes, but if you just take 3 minutes and said, what is the moral of my life? What is the moral or the theme of my life? Or what is the purpose of what I want my life to be? Could you put it into a sentence? Just think about it for 3 minutes. Think about that for 3 minutes. Just put it into a sentence, or maybe a few words. All right. Anybody was able to think about this and put it into a sentence or a few words? Anybody want to share? You're like, come on, Dr. Law, you only gave us 3 minutes to think about a sentence or a phrase that kind of summarizes our life and who we are? Yes. Amanda says I gave you a midlife crisis. That is not my that is not my intention. I just want you to think about what you want. Anybody? How many of you found this difficult? How about this? How many of you found this difficult? Samuel rose his hand. Israel, yeah, yeah. A lot of you are finding this difficult. Well, I'm glad because you need to start thinking about this, right? Because this is your moral. This is your theme, right? Um, so how about this? Let me see. How many of y'all can guess what mine is? What's my life theme, my life moral? Can y'all guess? There, Majula found it, right? Con ganas, right? My life moral is if you're gonna do anything in life, make sure you do it con ganas, with desire, with passion, right? This is what I live by. This is what defines me, that I'm not gonna do a job unless I can put in my 100%, right? And I will always put in 100% to a job. If I can't do it, I won't do that job, right? That's my theme. That's my life story. That's how I live my life, right? Another one that I love um, is there are two important days in your life: the day you are born and the day you find out why, right? This is how I live, right? This is my philosophy, my life's philosophy. You need to think about yours, right? You need to think about yours and what you want yours to be, right? What do you want your life philosophy to be? Uh, this leads us to the next slide here, which means you need to find an angle, right? Because in a lot of cases, a lot of you may have a life that lacks drama. Some of you are like, oh, you don't know my life. Okay, but for some of you, you may not have as much drama as others, right? You may not have had, you know, compared to that student that I told you was having chemo, right, and fighting cancer, that might not be your life, right? But you might have something. You need to think about this, right? How can you tie in your personal struggles? If you don't really have any significant personal struggles, then talk about your life's philosophy, right? And think about how you would live to carry that out. All right, guys, I'm just unmute and ask your question. I don't want to miss your question. So then here's the main thing, or a key thing, I should say. You need to concentrate on that opening paragraph. Just like we mentioned in writing a research proposal, you need to grab their attention on that first paragraph. And by doing so, and you need to hold on to it for the whole remainder of the personal statement. Because remember, I told you, they're going to read about 20 to 40 of these. And if you're number one, you better hope that they remember you at the end of number 40, right? And they're going to remember you if you grab them at the beginning paragraph, right? And you hold on to them and you put a mental picture in their head, something that will not let them forget. And you want to make sure that you solidify that. And in that first paragraph, you set your theme, right? You set the theme, which is very similar to your thesis statement, but it's a theme of your life story with a mental picture, and then the whole next paragraph after that is just reinforcing that theme, right? Reinforcing that theme. Then what you're going to do is you're going to tell what you know, right? In the middle section of the essay, this is where you're going to provide details about your interests, right? How did your interest develop? Through what type of experiences in the field did they develop, right? A lot of times what happens is students will make very naive comments, such as, I want to be that person who's in the room with this is like for medical school. I want to be that person who's in the room with them to help them get through the whole cancer aspect, and you know, really help them come to terms with this. Somebody's going to ask you, you know, nurses do this too, right? So do counselors, so do psychologists. Is this the field that you want to go into? Right? You need to think about these things. Alan, you have a question, go for it.
A physician told me previously that humidity is something that is very important for like med school. How exactly, well, I don't know if it's, well, if you have to incorporate it into your personal statement, but how exactly would you do that without like boasting?
Very
Or
good. Yeah, very good. And this is where the storytelling comes in, right? Because you're absolutely right. You do not want to boast, because when you start boasting, it starts to become a regurgitation of your resume. Like if you say, and then I single-handedly organized a fair in which we raised $8 million for this campaign. Show your experiences, tell a story about that experience, right? So that the reader can infer that you are humble, right? So what you can say is, rather than saying, you know, I single-handedly organized it. So upon organizing an event for children with muscular dystrophy, we invited multiple children and parents that were having complications to these diseases to help for them to share their stories and tell us how they live their lives with these disease and how the child lives with their lives with disease. Ultimately, this event raised a significant amount of money to help these people. Do you see what that did, right? Rather than saying, oh, I did this, I did this, I did that, you're showing your experiences and what you learned from those experiences. Does that make sense, Alan?
yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sammy, you have a question?
Yeah, so it's touching on the whole tell a story. Do the stories have to be relevant to college, or can it just be relative towards like our entire life?
It should be relevant to your theme, yeah, and relevant to the question that they're asking also, right? Um, but yeah, so it wants to be relevant to more importantly, relevant to the question that they are asking, but ultimately to the theme of of what you're delivering in that story. Yeah, it doesn't have to be directly related to school. Nope. It can be related to your medical experience, maybe just a personal story, a family story, something like this. Any other questions? No? Okay. So, but again, pull in these experiences, show your experiences. A lot of you, hopefully you have some type of medical experience, but it's not enough to say, oh, I was a scribe for so many years. No, tell me a story, tell me a story that you experienced while you were a scribe, right? That shows some of these characteristics, that shows that you're compassionate, that shows that you're reliable, that shows that you're dependable, without actually telling me that you're reliable and dependable, right? Tell it to me that I can infer this in a story. All right. Don't include some subjects. All right. What do I mean by this? Well, there are certain types of things that should be left out because references such experiences or accomplishments in high school or earlier generally not a good idea, because if unless it's something really significant, right? Unless you think it's something really significant. But if you're talking about your experiences from high school and you're getting your degree, a bachelor's degree, they're gonna say, what have you done since then, right? What have you done since then? So because high school, that was barely the growth phase. You people sure until college, right? So I would be cautious of those type of things. The other thing is, don't mention potential controversial subjects such as politics or religion, right? These can be very risky. For example, I remember reading a statement and somebody said, I really want to dive into the field, especially with all the changes in Obamacare these days. And like, ooh, some people may not take nicely to that term, and some might ignore those political types of comments, right? Alejandro, you have a question? Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry. How about using certain experiences and things you did like in high school to further imply your overall goals? Like for example, I was in a health profession high school. Um, so I was thinking of using that in terms of solidifying that I've been wanting to do this for a while because I had to apply for it in middle school and it was something I saw myself doing. So can we use them in that aspect?
For me, that would be one sentence, right? That would be, um, my interest in the medical field have been developed very early in high school when I was a part of this health professional program. Bam, one sentence, right? And then go into the most recent experience of, within the years I've fueled this experience by participating in, and then start talking about the most recent. Does that make sense, Alejandro?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So yeah, so avoid these topics, these political topics, these topics about religion, just because you don't know the person who's reading it. And you don't want them that if they have a bias or they disagree with you, that would bias your application anyway, right? There's a thing called implicit bias that everybody has. So just don't put them in a situation where they'd have to face that. They should be trained not to, right? But you never know who's reading your application. All right. Do some research if needed, right? You want to make sure that, especially those of you that are going to be applying to specific schools, so this goes to graduate school or medical school, if you're applying to a specific school, that you know that school very well, and that you're able to explain what is it about that school that you want to, why is it about that school that you want to visit and you want to join their program, right? Now, let's be truthful, right? Let's be honest, because I've asked this to students and I say, hey, what school do you want to go to? Anyone that'll take me, Dr. Elad, any of them that'll take me, right? Well, but you need to come up with some explanations, right, of why you would have to pick those schools, especially when you start interviewing. If you you start doing what I call the circuit, right? If you're a very competitive applicant, I say that you partake in the circuit. What's the circuit? That means that you start jumping from medical to medical school interview, from like you probably have one every 2 weeks or one every month, and you see the same people every single time, well, you need to be able to ready to explain why that medical school, right? And convince them that, yeah, that's, and the last thing you want to say, oh, well, this isn't really my first choice. My first choice is, so, ooh, no, 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 right? So you need to think about that. You need to know the university that you're applying to. Nonetheless, if you're visiting, you really need to know it very well there too. Okay. Write well and correctly, right? Because they're not only trying to get information about who you are from your personal statement, they're also trying to tell, how are your writing skills, right? And can you express yourself? So with that said, the writing that I have been teaching you for so many months now is very different than what I'm about to tell you to write here. This is narrative writing. Personal statements are narrative writing compared to uh, research proposals. That's technical writing, right? And the narrative writing, you have to tell a story, right? So you're gonna have to switch our gears here. And it's kind of funny because I've been trying to break some of you from doing narrative writing, and now towards the end, I'm telling you, okay, we need to go back to it, right? But yeah, you need to write well, you write correctly, clearly, concisely, because a lot of cases you only have a certain amount of words that you can use, right? So your methods and your skills in writing for conciseness and clarity and comprehension, these should come in very handy. All right. Avoid cliches, and I mentioned this before, right? Very common in medical schools, very common in science, people applying to graduate school. Medical school, I want to cure cancer. Well, chances are it's not a physician that's going to do that. Chances are that's going to be a scientist that's going to do that. And if they do, you can't really cure it, right? That's a very naive thing. You'd have to go after a particular strain of cancer itself. You can't cure all of them with one treatment, right? I want to save lives. Well, okay, you're probably going to lose lives too, right? I mean, that's not a reason to go into being a doctor. I want to help people. Well, nurses help people too. So why don't you want to be a nurse? So, if anything, I think nurses do a lot more of the legwork. I have two sisters that are nurses. So why not go into that, right? Ever since I was a kid, I was always fascinated with how science works. I wanted to know, why does why does water freeze? Why is the sky blue? Why does the wind blow? Yeah, I'm sure everything's this the moment they first experience it, right? Avoid these type of cliches, all right? Avoid these type of cliches. Last one, have someone read your statement. It should be somebody that you trust, that they can really that you're not afraid for them to know you, because you are making yourself vulnerable on this personal statement, right? To get a real insight of who you are. But it needs to be somebody you trust to read it, and get a lot of people to read it. Do not give it to that person. You're not going to give it to your abuelita who's going to say, ay, mijo, this was so good. I know, right? You need to give this to somebody who can be like, oh, this needs work, and here's all the red ink with it, right? Because if I ask somebody to read a draft that I wrote, and they come back and they say, oh, this was really good, this is so little problems, I'd be like, all right, I need to give this to somebody else, right? Because you want honest feedback, and you shouldn't get your feelings hurt too. And I always feel bad too, because I get a lot of students who ask me, do you mind if you read my personal statement? Especially right now, the emails are coming in. I'm all like, coronavirus. And I'm just like, can you read this and give me some feedback? And then I always feel bad. At least maybe now I don't have to see their face, because when I have it, it's all red ink everywhere, and this change that, and they're just like, I was like, look, don't feel bad, right? You asked me to revise it. You asked me to give you feedback. These are just some tips, right? So you should be willing to accept criticism and realize that the person's only trying to help you. Now, here's the other thing that you should realize, that at the end of the day, the decision is yours. And you can't forget that. At the end of the day, the decision is yours. You decide whether you want to incorporate those comments or not, right? Because the personal statement is supposed to convey who you are. And if somebody says, well, I think it'd be better if you kind of said it this, and you're like, but that's not me, then that's your call, right? Because it's your personal statement. So you need to the one to decide, yeah, that's kind of a little bit better about what I was trying to say, or no, that's not the direction I was trying to go in. You need to make that call. Andrew says, when writing our personal statements, do we usually avoid writing in the first person point of view, or is it usually always in the first person point of view, since we are discussing our experiences, right? And it typically is your point of view. That's absolutely right. So you write it in your point of view. All right, so that was the last slide, and I'm going to go ahead and take questions. Notice this was a longer lecture than before, but there's just so much to cover. Questions? No questions. Crickets. When is it due? I don't remember. It's on the syllabus, though. Oh, wait, I think I have the syllabus here. The rough draft is due on the 30th, right? This is something that's going to take some time for you to write. It's due on the 30th. Any other questions? So it's part of the proposal. No. Personal statement is not part of the proposal. We're at professional development right now. Also, how are the finals going to work for the class? So the finals are going to be the mock interviews, right? So during finals times, we're going to meet on WebEx and we're going to do mock interviews. Any other questions? All right, so notice that next class, we're still talking about the personal statement. So I've given you basically an outline of what your personal statement should include, right, and things to think about. So you need to start thinking about this. On Thursday, I'm going to give you about 2 writing samples, and we're going to discuss them. Did they go over these things, right? Did they do this well? Did they do this badly, right? And that way you can get ideas of how to write these personal statements. All right? Okay, well, if there's no questions, then I'm going to end it there. I hope you guys have a good day, a better day than I did. But it's okay because I can feel that my organic 2 is going to lift up my spirits at 6 o'clock, I hope. But yeah, any questions, go ahead and ask. If not, I'm going to call it the day.
Dr. Aguilar?
Go for it.
Hey, you said these personal statements were geared towards like grad school and medical school. What if we just want to go get a job? Like,
I'm sorry?
is it? You said the personal statements are geared towards graduate school and medical school.
Right.
Yeah. So what if we're not doing either of those?
Well, then you're gonna have to use this as a writing exercise, right? So use this either as thinking about going for pick one, right? And then if you're not really thinking about medical school, then probably the easier one to do would be graduate school, and use that as a completed writing assignment.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Anybody else? All right. Now I'm going to end the class, and I'll see you on Thursday.